Today, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about the immune system effects of hyperbaric oxygen and other strategies we combine with hyperbaric oxygen when dealing with different immune system goals or different immune system issues. Even though we talk about hyperbaric oxygen a lot on this channel, we virtually almost never use it by itself when helping patients manage certain health issues or reach certain health-related goals. So we've done a number of videos on the mechanisms of action of hyperbaric. If I were to break those mechanisms into 4 categories, they would be the mechanical effect, the immune system effect, the hyperoxygenation effect, and the regenerative healing impact that hyperbaric oxygen has. If we looked at just the immunological impact, which is what we're talking about today, we could break that into 2 categories: the effect that hyperbaric has on inflammation and the effect that hyperbaric has on fighting infection. So today we're going to look at those 2 categories and why hyperbaric has that effect on the immune system, along with other strategies you might want to consider if you, someone you love, or one of your patients might be dealing with these kinds of issues. Let's start with the reducing inflammation side of this equation. Whether we're talking about systemic inflammation, which might include either neurodegenerative processes or chronic autoimmune diseases, these types of conditions have elevated levels of inflammation systemically, often throughout the whole body. Or we're talking about acute local inflammation, which might happen post-surgical or from an injury or a trauma. In either case, hyperbaric oxygen has a long history and an enormous amount of data showing that hyperbaric helps to reduce the inflammatory process inside of our body. In fact, inflammation is actually one of the most essential components of the healing process. There are 4 steps essentially to healing, and the inflammatory step is critical. However, we have to be able to move from the inflammatory stage into the proliferative phase, which is really where healing and regeneration occurs. Hyperbaric oxygen's impact on reducing inflammatory cytokines is critical for reducing this local or systemic inflammation inside the body. In addition, it even seems like almost all pressures offer this particular benefit. Even in our own research that we did, we showed that 1.3 lowered systemic inflammation and 2.0 lowered systemic inflammation. They did have impact on some slightly different cytokines, but essentially both pressures, and so therefore most likely pressures in between, would all have this reducing inflammatory effect. And if you want more information on that video and the research that we did and the findings, we'll put a link below in the description so that you can check that video out later. In addition to the fact that mild pressures and higher pressures both seem to impact inflammation in a favorable way, I would also say that if we broke hyperbaric into short-term and long-term benefits, that reducing inflammation would fall somewhere in the short-term benefits. In other words, you could already start to see changes of reduced inflammation within 5 or 10 sessions. And while that might not be enough to solve the issue, it's at least an indication that you're on the right track, and people would typically start seeing the impact relatively quickly as far as symptoms associated with this inflammatory reaction. And so because this falls into some of the short-term benefits, somebody with a local and acute issue from trauma or injury, they may only need 10 to 15 sessions, and that might be the whole story for them. Whereas somebody with a neurodegenerative or autoimmune, yes, they could start to see those changes relatively quickly. However, because of the nature of the disease or the illness, they probably will require more sessions than that, and even ongoing maintenance sessions. Even once a certain benefit has been achieved, in order to maintain that benefit, we're likely going to need ongoing care to keep it at bay. And so while hyperbaric is incredible for reducing systemic and local inflammation, what are some of the other strategies we might use? So first of all, I always really want to look for the root cause. So maybe some additional testing is appropriate to try to find out where the inflammation is coming from in the first place. For me, that would be usually including testing around toxicity, environmental toxins, and food toxicity, inflammation coming from our diet. So testing those 2 categories and taking the appropriate steps if either or both of those things show up would be critical for not only improving the inflammatory issues, but actually keeping them under control for the long term. Once we've tested for food issues or environmental toxins, have essentially dealt with whatever those issues may be, we then may add additional modalities or other services that may also help improve and reduce inflammation even further. For us, that looks like adding red light therapy, often before hyperbaric, but not always. But combining red light therapy and hyperbaric as a broader approach to reducing systemic inflammation is very, very effective, as are other therapies like PEMF or contrast therapies between hot and cold, let's say sauna and ice bath. Many people, although they struggle initially, let's say with especially ice bath, and so going in slowly and dropping the temperature over time is probably what they're going to need in order to be successful here. Many of these people find tremendous benefit from systemic inflammation by utilizing ice. And then having that contrast of hot and cold helps the body to detox, helps control the inflammation, and then helps build their system to become more robust and adaptable, which is going to help them also long-term manage this inflammatory issue. One more additional long-term strategy would be fasting. We know that fasting helps reduce systemic inflammation. We know that fasting helps reduce the load that food is putting on our body from a digestive standpoint. We also know that fasting stimulates autophagy, which allows the body to remove and recycle old and sick cells to stimulate a stem cell response, a healing response, which will allow the immune system to re-regulate, rebalance, and create a healthier immune relationship inside of our body. Many of the strategies that you would use for systemic inflammation would be similar to local, but maybe we would utilize different tools. In other words, if it's systemic inflammation, I would tend to use systemic red light or a red light panel or a red light bed. Whereas if it were local, I would probably use a laser because we could target the local area with the therapy that we're trying to administer. Just as ice baths might be great for systemic inflammation, local ice or local cryotherapy could be incredibly beneficial for controlling inflammation in a local area. We'll get right back to that video, but real quick, if you're a practitioner or you're looking to get into hyperbarics and you're wanting to learn more and making sure that you're offering this therapy as effectively and as safely as possible, I want you to know that we offer a series of courses, some of which are online and some of which are in person. At thehbotcourse.com, we'll include a link below. We have several courses available, from training and certification in hyperbaric medicine, safety director, as well as a few different business implementation options to get the business up and running. So if you think that training and education would be helpful for you, take a look at thehbotcourse.com. Again, the link will be in the description below. Now back to our video. In addition to light and cold, we might also use acoustic sound waves or devices like shockwave therapy, which could also apply a very specific and local therapy, improving the healing response, reducing inflammation, and stimulating a regenerative nature inside those tissues to help heal and repair that injury. On the infection management side, hyperbaric has two main mechanisms at work. Number one, it increases the oxygen systemically. And number two, it improves your immune system's ability to fight infection on its own. It literally helps improve and activate white blood cells for a more effective and a more robust response to an invader. On the hyperoxygenation side, particularly for anaerobic infections, primarily anaerobic bacteria or anaerobic mold, that higher level of oxygen can really help create an environment that's not conducive for those organisms to be able to live. So just by creating that environment, it's already putting a lot of pressure on those microbes and creating a hostile environment where they cannot thrive. As we then create a more robust immune system and build a much stronger defense against these microbes, the immune system could do its job, which is to fight those infections more effectively. There's been a number of concerns about, well, what about an aerobic infection? And is it unfavorable then to utilize hyperbaric when we're dealing with aerobic infections, which actually live in an oxygen environment? And while I have not seen any studies associated with that concept, clinically, what I could say is it appears that the effect that hyperbaric is having on the building of the immune system and improving that person's immune system to fight infection seems to supersede any potential feeding of an aerobic infection that we might be doing. So I have not seen a patient get worse or have an infection spread because we're utilizing hyperbaric. I've only actually seen that using hyperbaric with infection does seem to help that patient manage and move through that infection in a much more favorable way. In addition to hyperbaric, what might we do for somebody who's fighting an infection? Quite honestly, they vary quite a bit depending on what type of infection we're talking about. But just globally, what are some other strategies? One would be ozone therapy, another oxygen therapy, but with ozone, we're utilizing the free radical component of oxygen. In case you're not aware, your own immune system uses reactive oxygen species, ROS, as part of its strategy for fighting infection, particularly viral infection, but not exclusive to. And so utilizing ozone is literally delivering a reactive oxygen species. And systemically, we're going to utilize that ozone to actually improve the power and the speed by which we're able to get rid of whatever this infection might be. In a patient that might be very sensitive or chronically ill and very depleted, we would likely not do hyperbaric and ozone on the same day. As they get stronger and more resilient, we may very well combine those therapies in the same day in order to push those reactions even a little bit harder. But we do that very cautiously, as we certainly don't want to make this patient worse. So we want to support them, make them stronger, more resilient, and as they can handle more, we do more. In addition to ozone, we might also use certain immune boosting IVs. While I wholeheartedly believe that most, if not all of our nutrition should come from our food, there's also a time and a place where either you couldn't eat enough oranges, as an example, to get enough vitamin C to really impact a certain infection. And so mega dosing certain nutrients at certain times and bypassing the digestive system and getting it right into the bloodstream could be really important for certain people at certain times. So using IVs with zinc and magnesium, certain B vitamins, glutathione, all of that could really help improve immune system function, in addition to high-dose vitamin C, which we very well know is a safe and terrific way to kick that immune system into high gear and use the oxidative rather than the antioxidant value of vitamin C. At high doses, vitamin C actually acts more like an oxidant than an antioxidant. So again, in that sort of free radical model, and we're now using that to also help fight the infection. In addition to IVs and ozone, depending on the infection, we could also use antimicrobials, whether that's pharmaceutical antimicrobials like antibiotics or natural antimicrobials. And so there are a number of natural antibacterial, antiviral, and antifungal supplements out there, and could certainly be used in conjunction with the IVs, with the ozone, and or with hyperbaric when appropriate. I'm a firm believer, and I'm sure you agree, that when you combine certain therapies, the impact of the synergy is far more powerful than any one of these strategies by itself. So again, as you well know, hyperbaric is one of my go-tos for so many different people, for so many issues or goals that people have, because I know the power of oxygen. Combining it with other strategies, depending on the goal, could really make the hyperbaric work even better, along with making a more robust response, depending on what outcome we're trying to achieve. So I didn't go into incredible depth in terms of the details behind hyperbaric's impact on the immune system, because I've covered that in other videos. So if you're interested to learn more about mechanisms of action, we're going to put a link right here so that you can click on the mechanisms video. Or if you want to know more information, like the details of hyperbaric's impact on helping to control inflammation, we did a much more detailed video just on that topic. So you can click there to see that video as well. As always, thanks again for your time and attention, and I'll see you next week.